Hey, you guys, welcome back. This is Richard Sachs, your host on Lost Arts Radio. This is Lost Arts Radio Live for August 24th, 2019. And I guess we are live today on most of the major platforms. We're not being punished anymore, as far as I know, which is great, but it's going to bring up some questions that we will discuss during this quick hour. And I just think 2019, how could it be 2019? I remember the 1950s like they were not just yesterday, but this morning, a few hours ago. This is a weird experience, the one they call real life, and just being in the middle of it, trying to figure it out. I think you need at least the first 100 years to get your bearings, but it's just an interesting experience. That I remember a long time ago, 1984 was so far in the future that it seemed like it would probably never come. It was so far out, but now we're here in what seemed like the future before. And how did it happen? I don't really know. This time thing, there's been a lot of interesting commentary on it, but I don't feel any closer to really understanding it. A very strange experience. And now that we're here in late 2019 with Lost Arts Radio, we're kind of at a crossroads, not just in understanding time, but we've got a decision to make. And do we want to be able to stay on the major platforms or get kicked off? And I'd rather stay on, because whatever comments people make about them, they are where most of the audience still is. And it's taken a long time even to get the little bit of audience that we have now. And I'd rather not lose it right away. So if we do want to stay on it, the question really is, how do we do that and still tell the truth about what's happening in the world? Now, on some of the channels like Brighteon.com, we're on Brighteon.com/channel/Lost Arts Radio, and you really should make a note of that in case we happen to disappear on the other ones. On that channel on Brighteon, it's pretty easy, because the whole point of Brighteon was it started by Mike for not censoring. And it's a new channel, so if you want to support it, please use it as much as you can. You don't have to do anything with money. Just using it helps them get going. And soon they'll be developed to the point where you'll be able to subscribe to channels kind of like on YouTube, and it's going to get better and better and better. But I'd like to stay on the major channels too, if we can. So my choice is that I want to do that. And I'm going to start sharing with you on another level, that if you're picking up on it, there's a lot that I'll be saying, but it's not in the same words. And you'll know more what I'm talking about as we get into it. I think it'll be more likely, anyway, to be allowed to stay on, at least for the foreseeable future, and we'll see if I'm actually right or not. And in an hour a week, I mean, that's nothing. We can't cover much of the major news. I've been mentioning high points of it that I think are really important, and I may still do that. But you can see the link on lostartsradio.com for a good news channel, and there are actually many others, some of them we'll refer to. But in the middle of the crackdown right now, anybody who mentions a real news channel is likely to get banned. So I have to be really careful with that if we want to stay on. I can make the other choice and just be blatant, like I have been, and just say everything and disappear, and I'm not sure if that's the most brilliant decision. So I'm going to do it on a more personal, deeper level, and we'll be talking about all the same things and more, but in a different way. So I was mentioning the 1950s a few minutes ago, and back in the 60s when I was a university student, and the feeling was a lot different in the university campuses than it is now. I mean, we were protesting the Vietnam War at that time in the second half of the 1960s, not against the soldiers at all, but just vaguely realizing that they were being used as a tool of what we now know as the deep state, but it wasn't as clear to the people I knew at that time. But we had the feeling that they were being sent to some distant country to kill people, kids and adults, and in a place far away where the U.S. military was actually an invading force and full of wonderful people. I mean, some of whom were relatives of mine. I was actually subject to the draft in 1967, but they had a lottery, and I almost got picked. I actually went to the place where they were checking people out to see if they were going to go, but I got rejected for the health problems that I was still having at that time. So even if I wanted to, I wouldn't be able to go. But we just knew that it had something to do with the oil companies and the war machine, and murdering and stealing resources for the hidden motives didn't really seem that appealing. It wasn't that the people that were against it were not brave as a rule. It was that if you're going to go kill people, there really probably should be a really good reason for that. And according to the principles upon which the U.S. Was started, at least the ideals that still are waiting to be lived up to, you don't, let alone kill, you don't hurt anybody preemptively. I mean, the only place that that's even at all acceptable is in self-defense. And when you're going 10,000 miles away to kill people that didn't do anything and are just, running around in their own country, it's highly questionable, to say the least. So it didn't seem like a very good thing to us, and that was what we were dealing with and protesting against at the time in '67 and around then. And at the same time, though, I mean, it wasn't all reasonable stuff. We did have groups like SDS, the name was Students for a Democratic Society, and by democratic they meant communist, pushing violence and destruction in order to get peace and utopia, a lot like the communist groups do now, the ones dressed up in black out in the streets and everything. And it's pretty much the history of communism is violence to overthrow the evil people that have things so that it can be wonderful and everybody has the resources, and you'll get people to administer it in the government, in the Communist Party, that are totally benevolent, have no selfish interest at all, and just want everybody to be happy. And then they end up killing everybody, and it's not as good as the advertisement said. But most of us were not like those groups. We were not violent. I think, in a way, we were actually real liberals. And I was brought up by my parents, who were liberals and Democrats. And my understanding of it was that was the same as caring about people, wanting to have everybody have a good life, and be resisting the evil rich people that were oppressing everybody. And I didn't really realize at that point, what was actually wrong with it. But by the time we got to school, to the university in the 60s, a lot of us were very idealistic in that same way of looking at things. And I would say we were liberals, but pretty much in a good sense of the term, thinking about how can we make the world better and live and let live, love each other, love the earth, the resources, keep it clean. We'd been aware of Rachel Carson, that a lot of the so-called conservatives make fun of now, but Rachel Carson, I still think, was really wise, and she was pointing out the pesticide issue, that it's really not brilliant to poison your life support system, the whole ecosystem, because you depend on it, and it's not good for you. I mean, that's really all she said, and then it was happening in an extreme scale with the chemical companies, and it's actually much worse than she portrayed. So I still agree with all that stuff, actually. And I tried to use it to bring together leaders of prominent political parties or organizations on both sides of the political spectrum. And it hasn't worked up to now, so I'm absorbing that lesson. But at the time, besides being a student, I was a musician, a gardener, health researcher, spiritual explorer, basically a hippie, and even though now I know from decades of deep research about chemical agriculture and toxic medical industry and the deep state and energy and environment and economics and banking, and all these areas I've had to learn about, because if you want to understand what's going on, those are really all parts of one issue. And I got into a lot deeper levels of health consciousness and tools that I learned to use myself and a lot more. But back then, I was kind of a hippie musician, gardener, health researcher, spiritual explorer, and you know, the bottom line, as I'm saying, that's still who I am. I'm not really on either side of the political spectrum at all, other than being in favor of freedom and access to real information, not having it shut down like it is now. Letting people know how to take care of themselves and what their real potential actually is, who they are. So all these decades later, it's an odd experience, you know, because one of my real focuses in the health research has been, you got to figure out this aging thing, because if you don't, there's so much to learn and to understand and ego stuff to get over. You're going to need the first 100 years just to figure out what's the basics of what's going on. And everybody's body is, most of the people are, their body falls apart. You know, at that time I was thinking by the time they're 50 or something, as they start feeling really uncomfortable and being in pain all the time and all kinds of physical problems that I felt like were completely unnatural, not necessary, abnormal, avoidable, preventable, reversible. And I still believe all that stuff. And so now my experience of time, being a so-called old person in the present tense, my sense of it is kind of like, I still don't understand time, but if you pictured it like a river, now I feel like I'm standing in the middle of it, not moving, and just watching it flow by. But I feel like I'm in a sci-fi movie, and that's aside from all the things that are going on in the world that are like beyond sci-fi. I mean, the hidden technology being 50 to 100 years ahead of what we're told. Look at the work of Stephen Greer and people like that. Dr. Stephen Greer, it's really worth looking at some of his videos on YouTube. They're all free, and you get exposure to some interesting stuff there. Anyway, I was really focused on what can you do to get around this apparently abnormal thing where your body starts falling apart in half the time that you need just to get started with your life. But now, I mean, it makes the good old days in the 60s look amazing, when the kids in school were not sick. The elementary school kids weren't sick. Of course, everybody got measles, which they knew at that time was just an excuse to watch cartoons and stay home for a few days. It was not a big, you know, terroristic threat or outbreak or any of that kind of nonsense. It was just, it itched a little bit and you got some spots, and that happened with measles and chickenpox and mumps to everybody. Nobody was worried about it. It wasn't an outbreak. You didn't have governors and mayors and people saying, okay, we have to do this to you against your will because it's for the greater good. That violates the Fourth Amendment and other things like that, and also the principle of informed consent, which has been agreed to voluntarily by all countries that are signatories to the Geneva Agreement after the Nuremberg trials. And the United States is one of them. Probably the country that you're listening in is one of them too, most likely. There's like 120 signatories or something. And you can't violate that for the public good, or for, you know, because you declare an emergency. You know, as the U.S. openly said this in the founding documents, that the rights that you have did not come from your government, and they did not come from the United Nations, and they didn't come from any of these groups. They came from God or your creator, or if you prefer nature, but you're born with them. And so they're irrevocable. And you can't just do things to people against their will medically and stuff like that. That's not allowed. So what would a person who realizes all that say about the insanity that spread across the whole world, really, but certainly across the US and Europe and a lot of other places, and it's dragging everybody down a dark hole into tyranny and extermination. Now, it might sound like I'm saying a few, somewhat intense things, but I'm avoiding certain language, and I hope that helps us all stay in touch so we don't just disappear. But I guess one of the main things that I notice as a theme of all this is that common sense. You remember hearing about something like that in the distant past, like legends, and they used to talk about that as something that everybody had, and it seems like that's getting forgotten, and instead we're getting educated. Science, what we were taught about what science really was originally a long time ago, is that it questions everything. In fact, there were bumper stickers that said that. In the mid-'60s, there was a famous bumper sticker that said, question authority. And then there was a sequel to that right after it. It said, just question everything. That's science. That's what real science is. It's not, the question is not, well, what journal can you prove it came out of? Or something like, that's just irrelevant. And I know that's blasphemy for the academic world, but it's true that if you stick with having to prove that the person who's saying an idea has a certain credential or degree or, something like that, they're a member of the right association or something, that's the end of science. It's over, at least until it starts again. Because there's a lot of things that are really valuable information that are not recognized in the journals. The journals being the magazines put out by JAMA and the medical industry in different parts, and psychological industry, and which just decides what diseases they're going to put in their manual and stuff like that. The really deep, clear, honest information is generally not in there. And the current education system teaches us that, well, it has to be in there. If it's not in there, it's not right. It's not true. That's the society that's built now. And it's when I first got into it, not in the 60s, but in a recent university involvement that I'm in the middle of now, I was saying, wait a minute, where is this coming from? I didn't see this develop to this extent before. And so I went and I found that the accrediting agencies have contracts with the universities. We'll accredit you. All you have to do is obey everything we say about how to run your school. And that's the first accrediting agency. And then there's an accrediting agency above the accrediting agency, and they tell the accrediting agency just to make really sure that they're setting their rules correctly so that nobody can think outside the box of politically correct and scientifically correct thinking. That's how we got this crazy thing about the medical procedures that have to be done on people without their consent for the greater good, which is, violates all the principles of any supposedly free country. So common sense used to know that stuff, and now we're being educated out of common sense, and instead we're also sinking into kind of a poisonous virtual reality, which means living in screens all the time. And like any powerful technology, it has uses, because without the screens, you wouldn't be seeing any of this show or any other show. I mean, the only person who'd be seeing me is this bottle of water, because everybody else is watching online or to the archive. So I'm not anti-technology at all. I think it's great, but the sign of whether technology is a good thing in the end or not, or whether it does stuff to you that you didn't think of that's not good, is it human friendly? Is it friendly to life? Is it healthy for you? Does it allow you to stay in touch with your own what used to be common sense? And right now, the virtual reality that the kids and everybody else is subjected to is all programmed to make sure you don't get in touch with who you are, and that's not a good thing. And also, of course, the frequencies that are specifically and intentionally used to power the cell phones, smart meters, Internet of Things elements, tablets, all kinds of radar installations, NexRad, things like that. Those are chosen to be destructive. It's not a scientific oversight. They didn't say, whoa, rats, wish we had thought about that. Too bad we're destroying all life on the planet. It's not unintentional. So technology could be designed completely differently. And right now, as far as the Wi-Fi stuff is concerned, from everything that I've been able to find out, the fiber optic cable network is pretty much almost all installed all over America and some other places too. It could just be added to slightly and hooked up, and it'd be much faster, more reliable than what they're calling 5G. By the way, Mark Steele was just on our Sunday show recently talking about 5G, and there's some really unique information on that you might want to go back and see if you have time. But the kids are getting lured by bright colors and flashy characters on the screen and endless intriguing possibilities where you can do anything you want in the screen while your body just sits there, doesn't get outdoor exposure or playing or sunshine or exercise things that it needs. Disconnection for the sake of convenience, you would say. Convenience is the same thing that has lured millions of people into living on junk food and giving the extra business to the medical industry. If you're not aware of that stuff, you get hurt by it, It's really a choice, and we're getting led into oblivion for the kind of like the thrill of a ride to nowhere that looks really flashy, and then it ends up in total destruction. So the question is really, is there an antidote, or is it too late to avoid the destruction? And that's what I'm interested in, is solutions. It's another reason I want to start changing the focus of this program, is that we've already got a link on the site, and it's a channel on BitChute and also on Brighteon. Brighteon one is really good, and it's a guy whose first name is Ron and his last name is Gibson, and hopefully I'm allowed to mention him. Haven't heard that I'm not yet, but it's his channel number 2 on Brighteon that's really good, and it's a news show, and it's playing the news show of a person that I cannot mention or will be banned immediately, because in order for everybody to have a free, wonderful life, they have to totally silence the people that are unacceptable, which is kind of an interesting paradox in itself. So what I'm saying is, if you want news, go look at that one. Look at other great independent news sources that are going right to the source and take their camera and say, look, that's what's happening. Not just from little restricted field of vision so you can't see the bigger picture. They'll pan all around, they'll talk to people, they'll interview people involved with it, they'll talk to whistleblowers directly, which has been happening a lot with James, and his last name is O, and then Keefe. Amazing stuff on his channel lately that hopefully will change things for the better as far as freedom of speech go. But again, you have those resources, okay? There's no way I can even do an infinitesimal amount of that in the time that we've got, and I don't have these big crews that some of these great channels have now. So what I'm interested in is, okay, solutions that are good for everybody. I'm not against anybody. I'm not into the mentality of destroy the bad guys, and we'll talk about why that is. But if you want solutions, and since we're talking about what is for me a few minutes ago, but most people would call it the old days, in the 60s, in 69, Joni Mitchell wrote a song called Woodstock about the gathering of people at this big music festival in New York. And she didn't get to go because she had an important thing she was doing in Chicago at the time, but she wrote a song called Woodstock that became famous and was done by several other bands. And the bottom line of it in the song, it's an interesting song. If you haven't heard it, You might want to listen to it. It's free on YouTube in many versions. And she was saying, we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. And remember, well, I guess I didn't tell you about Alan yet, but I think that's about the simplest one-sentence answer to the insanity that's plaguing humanity today. We've got to get back to the garden. And, I'm exposing myself as a hippie gardener and musician to you guys. I'm not just a person that wants to list the bad things happening in the world every week. There's already plenty of people doing that. I'll refer to them, but that's not the function of the show. So what's this silly thing about getting back to the garden? What does that really mean? What's the whole thing about? I've got more here than I can have time to cover, but I'll hit the high points. Here's my take on it. In 1967, I was working at the university with an incredible visionary horticulturist, somebody who does plants, and soil and the ecosystem and stuff like that. And his name was Alan Chadwick. You can look him up if you want to. That was an amazing person. It was while I was in school, and afterwards for a while too. I was in touch with him for several years after I got out of school then, and he ended up dying of cancer not too long after. He didn't live really long, but he was in his 50s when I first met him, and that was at the university. He wasn't like the academic experts in agriculture and horticulture who just, know all the right chemicals and poisons you need to grow the food, to grow big crops in sterilized, poisoned environment, making sure it's on dead soil that has no bad insects in it or any other life forms, and slowly poison whoever buys and eats the food, giving lots of new business to the medical drug dealers, and who do to people what the chemical fertilizers do to the soil. It's very similar between agriculture and medicine, actually. But Alan Chadwick was totally different than that. It was an amazing experience to meet him, because I was going off to the university for the first time. I didn't know what in the world I was supposed to do with it. I was taking all these science courses, and it was a lot like elementary school. I was interested in all the subjects, but I just didn't like the classes because I wanted to question everything. It was not because I read about what real science was. That was just what I wanted to do. It was like when I was in second or third grade, whenever it was, and they said, well, they didn't have computers, obviously. This was ancient history. But they made a big cardboard, poster kind of thing with a grid on it and numbers from 1 to 12 down the left side of it and 1 to 12 across the top. And you know what that was, right? It was a multiplication table. Like you look down the lines, and nowadays you don't have to know what anything about arithmetic is. You're carrying your telephone, which has a calculator. And whatever it tells you, you believe because it's always right. In those days, you had to actually know how to do arithmetic. It was weird, right? Compared to now, but it was just normal. And so we'd look down the left side and say, oh, there's 6, and across the top, and here's 9. And you see where those two, the row and the column meet, and there's a 54 there because that's what 9 times 6 is, or 6 times 9. And I said in second or third grade, you want me to learn that table, memorize it? Okay, I will, but why? And how does it work? And I want to know. And the teacher was not happy with that at all, because she had to get on to the next point, but she stopped and gave me a basic explanation, and I thought, okay, that makes sense. And I learned it, and I still have the same problem. I want to know why everything, even if everybody in the solar system agrees, I don't care. Well, I mean, I care because they can really harass you if you don't agree too. But I don't take that as any indication whether something's true. Most of the people believe the white lines in the sky are water vapor. And that doesn't have anything to do with whether that's true or what's really going on. So Alan Chadwick was different than that, than what they teach in the memorizing system. And he was a student of a guy named Rudolf Steiner that was Austrian. You might have heard of him. And he was the founder of the biodynamic farming and gardening system and a lot of other things. He was a very interesting guy that had some ability to communicate with unusual beings in the garden that he learned a lot from. And I knew about them from a different source. And he saw the family farm as kind of a self-contained unit with healthy plants and animals cared for by the farmer to create a healthy ecosystem, kind of a great place to grow sane and wise human beings, as opposed to farms now. If they're not organic, I mean, they're really dangerous places for the farmer to work. And if there's any laborers, it's really bad for them as a rule, because even if the government approves a certain level of poison and says, oh yeah, go ahead and breathe that and get it on your skin, where it goes right in, by the way, and stuff like that, that doesn't mean that it's good for you. It means it may end up contributing to giving you cancer or other things like that. So this was before the time I'm talking about, when Alan was at the university, before the organic department, the USDA organic program, was started. So Alan had been Steiner's student, but really he was a student of nature. And he had dumped his kind of elite family, I mean, aristocratic family, I should say, in the UK. He had been a commander on a warship in World War II for England, and was just totally disgusted by all the killing he had helped do and the system of aristocracy. And he dumped it all and came to America to make a garden at a school, which happened to just be almost the same time that I went to the same school. And I ran into him in 1967, 2 years into my own health research. And then he changed the way that I saw all that stuff and showed me some new directions. And I spent the time I had to play in the game of the academic world, because I was officially a student in that world. But that was like a two-dimensional world, trying to pretend that it knew a lot and explained a lot. But most of the teachers didn't know why. They just lived in this continuous state of what we call an existential crisis, I guess, not comfortable with what they were doing, a lot of frustration and confusion and feeling disconnected, because in those days, we just talked openly with the professors, and it was a lot better that way. But they didn't realize the problem that they were having is they were in an artificial system, transferring it to the next generation so they wouldn't know what was going on. And they were disconnected from what Joni Mitchell referred to as the garden, just like I was. So I would finish the classwork every day and then go from that two-dimensional world into the three-dimensional world, and I'd find Alan, who was busy creating what seemed like magic to us that found him. It was like, what? You're not even memorizing that from a book? Where do you get this stuff? And it was like he wasn't memorizing Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner was a real teacher. So he taught Alan how to tune in to nature himself. You know, the greatest teachers don't make you dependent on them at all. They make you aware of what you can do like them. They're just kind of an example and a direction to find. But then at that time, the garden project that it was like on this rocky hillside, right, where there's poison oak, which grows in that climate, full of rocks and all kinds of stuff in the way of anything you'd want to do. And it was on a slope that most people would consider unusable. So the school said, well, this guy doesn't have any Nobel Prizes or even any PhDs. I mean, he can't really know much, but he's got this amazing reputation. So why don't we take advantage of that, give him a shovel, which we could justify the money for, and say, okay, you can build this incredible garden that you think that you can build over there. And it was created with this building like a log cabin that we called a chalet, where we would meet after the academic world was over for the day. We'd sit there and get lectured by Alan, he literally had been a professional Shakespearean actor. It was really amazing to be in his presence. Really imposing figure with a strong British accent, and just I can't do a good job of describing him, but you can look him up. He's got a couple of references on the internet. And as I was saying back then, the garden hadn't gotten academic acceptance. So all of us had to work with, all we had to work with in those days was nature itself. There was really no money for anything. There was no recognition. There was no academic aspect. So we were actually free to learn, which was an amazing contrast to what was going on in the official school. That was like memorizing and staying disconnected from the whole learning process. So Ellen would stand out in the middle of that slope, clearing where we were clearing the poison oak, and which is very tricky to clear poison oak, by the way, if you know anything about poison oak. And he would just stand there motionless with his eyes closed for like 10 or 15 minutes. And all of us were thinking, what's going on? What? Is he asleep or what? And then he would come out of the 10 or 15 minutes and would know everything that had to happen on the project for the day and who had to do what. And there were maybe 10 of us that would show up in between classes and things and just work, like apprentices to absorb what he was creating and building and teaching. I told you about the site, what it looked like. I'm trying to skip through so we don't run out of time here. So anyway, I was really fortunate. I got to be involved in the creation process on that garden, and it became world famous and started getting visitors from all over the world who would come to see the garden and Alan, and just, by the way, maybe glance around at the school while they were there, but the garden was the main attraction. And later the school took credit for the garden and said, oh yeah, we're the school that started this amazing organic garden before organic was a government term. I blended in the health research I was doing to get over my really serious health problems at that time, because I had dumped the medical system and decided to figure it out on my own. And I blended that in with the earth lessons from Ellen and direct from nature. This is going to relate to world events, okay? So I'm not like going off on a completely irrelevant tangent here. If you hold on for just a few minutes and you'll see how. So in those days that we would give away the flowers and food we grew to the school and at a roadside stand, and also to visitors. And they didn't understand that, because why are you giving us a gift? And there was meaning in that. That was really neat. And at night, I told you I was involved in music, and we'd go have these incredible impromptu music sessions, and there were some amazing musicians there that I had the privilege to meet. But a lot of times too, we would just go sit in these, the school was constructed in these different complexes, and in the middle was like this raised concrete area that you could sit and meet on. And a lot of times we'd sit out there late at night with teachers. The professors were a lot more approachable then, I think. And we were aware of the danger of nuclear war at that time. Remember, I don't know if people were still ducking and covering under the desks, but it was that kind of feeling like the Soviet Union was going to nuke us at any moment. And we were trying to figure out what to do to avert what we saw coming to the world if the questions weren't answered right then. We didn't really understand the hidden potential in each person that I think now is the only way that I can see to turn things around, not in the ways that are usually talked about. That was still waiting to be discovered, but at least we saw the necessity of connecting our lives back to the garden and nature 2 years before Joni wrote that song. And now it's 52 years later, and what would I add to that prescription for sanity for each one of us and for the world, other than just generally getting back in touch with nature? And now I'm aware, at a certain point, I have to say that in addition to what I learned from Alan and kept building on after that, and combining that with the natural health things and recovery from incurable diseases and how to reverse aging and stuff that I was really interested in. At some point, I realized you better learn about also how the world actually works, not just the idealistic part of it and what our potential is in nature and all that. Find out what humans are doing, because I was a little out of touch with that. Really, it didn't interest me too much. So I learned about the inner workings of the power structure, how it operates, how the real rulers are organizing and overseeing destruction. Amazingly, that people would even be interested in that. I mean, destroying your own planet seems like kind of an odd thing to want to do, but that's why most people aren't having any idea that that's going on. And I know now that if that agenda achieves what its goal is, then life on this planet's going to be over for quite a while. So I'm not suggesting doing nothing, like what would they call that? The kumbaya approach or something, where you just think, well, everybody will eventually just be really nice and it's going to be great if we are. I don't feel that. They're pretty determined to carry through what they're doing. But what I am saying is that any kind of positive action that you want to do to contribute to the future of the planet is only as effective as the consciousness behind it. And that's not commonly understood. People think what they're doing physically is the whole thing. You protest this, or you try to get massive awareness in the public that this terrible thing is happening, and somehow that's just going to create an overwhelming force to fix it. I don't see that. I think that would be great if that was true, but I don't see that happening. I think the people in power are more coordinated than we have any idea, and they are not, we can vote on it, but they don't care about our vote. So it's hard for most people to understand the mentality of the people in charge of the power structure, including a lot of people I really admire. But I guess that one of the aspects of it is hating evil. It's like hating hate. It's not going to go anywhere except some bad places, because there's a frequency to everything. Just like cell towers have a frequency that's really destructive, humans put out a frequency too. It's subtle, but it's really powerful. And especially when there's lots of them in the same frequency. And frequency of hate and darkness is the same no matter who you hate. You can hate, a justified enemy because it's always justified. What's the frequency to it? That determines what the energy does. And this is not anything related to the misleading and dangerous laws against what they call hate speech. That's just censorship. I'm talking about the real energy that comes out of you and the dark energy that comes out of real hatred for anybody, even because it's always for the bad guys, right? Even the bad guys think they're against the bad guys, and it's not them. So it's actually, that's why it's encouraged by the rulers who are trying for destruction of the whole ecosystem, for us to hate, whoever we think is bad, and each other especially, and to be distracted fighting each other and worrying about who's right while they destroy everything. So what you do internally creates the other kind of frequency that's like light, uplifting, positive frequency that backs up your physical actions. And that's a whole other story. And that's why the rulers want to keep that concept, let alone practice, completely unknown to us. Because if that combination spreads, doing good things physically with the right consciousness behind it, that could get quickly beyond their ability to control. And it could even wake up some of them. So we would have allies within the power structure that were supposed to be busy destroying us. So once we understand that, and the energy behind what you do is what determines what the outcome is, how do we do that specifically? How do we trade in dark, justified energy, hating the bad guys, wanting to destroy them, for something on the light side, so we have a chance to turn things around? And I think it's still another deeper aspect of getting back to the garden, and that is that we, being part of the garden of nature, We're not supposed to be detached from it. We are part of it, operate on the same laws of nature that plants do, different parts of them. We have to heal ourselves before we can really have a better effect on everyone else. And remember, we're looking at alternatives, not alternatives, solutions for the overwhelming problems that are threatening the extinction of life right now. So if you start with the physical body, because you've got one of those, unless you're listening from another dimension or something, starting with your own physical body is the way to do it. So there are so many people working on these wonderful causes and just trashing their physical body. And, one of the things about doing that, your brain is actually part of your body. So if you pollute your bloodstream, your lymph system, your gut, everything else, and it's just, radiating poison, your brain doesn't work the same. And there was just a lecture that I heard from Dr. Gabriel Cousens, who's been on the show many times, and on the Sunday show. All kinds of free videos on the internet. And he was talking about the interaction of multiple toxins in the body, and that they're not additive, they multiply. So you really want to get those all out. And the first stage of healing the body is always getting rid of the poisonous residues from years of making mistakes about all that stuff, and or decades in the case of most of us. Self-poisoning with chemical foods, processed food, poisoned body care products, polluted city water with fluoride and stuff like that in it, sometimes lead and other things. Environmental toxins of all kinds, including the pesticides that we mentioned. Now we've been fooled into using these new technologies with microwave radiation, not just the cell phones, but the Wi-Fi and devices like that. And all the appliances are gradually moving toward that. I noticed I had to rent a car recently, and they're getting rid of CD players in all the new cars, and they're making it so you must use your smartphone plugged in with a USB cord into the console in the car, so that you're just never going to be without the smartphone. And we're subject to all this radiation from the smart grid, and pretty soon from the Internet of Things, if the government, in countries doesn't do anything to stop it. In the US, the president and Congress think it's wonderful, and we just forget 5G. We have to do 6G immediately. They're so out of it. But the problem is the really conscious people rarely want to be in the government, and I totally understand why. So the whole world environment needs to be cleaned up, just like our bodies. And the place to start is your own home, which is your physical body. You need to learn how to detox your body, because it's the same principles as detoxing the outside world in a different way. And your body has built-in detox mechanisms, so you can learn how to support them and learn how to build a new body with better material. And this change, as we said, if you're like most other people, your brain is actually part of your body. And that if you clean up the quality of your bloodstream and other things in your body, your brain doesn't work the same anymore. It starts to work like it's designed, and you get inspiration and quick understanding of things that you would just be struggling with indefinitely. And then also, not just inside your body, but you can replace the toxic cleaning products and things like that you've got in your house. You certainly don't want those around anybody. And toxic body care products, makeup that has lead in it, shampoo, carcinogenic hair dyes. You use clean organic alternatives, which fortunately are available. And yeah, it's a lot of work, and most people feel like they don't want to take the time to do that. But if you're living in this particular environment, in the physical world, you have a choice. You either do the work to learn how things operate, or you get blindsided by the effects. You can't just step aside and not be affected. You end up in the medical environment being diagnosed with something terrible and told by the doctors, well, we have no idea what happened. It probably has no cause. Or you just had bad genes, or you are pretty old, or something like that takes it out of your hands completely. And that doesn't feel good. I've watched many people go through that, and family members being killed by the treatments and by the disease both. So instead of that, you can stop eating and drinking poison dead food and beverages and switch over to organic whole foods. Just that has cured people of all kinds of stuff. I'm not saying that. I can't legally say anything like that, of course. So I have no idea. It's just my interesting opinion, that these things can be done, and it's all in your hands, and it always has been. More and more toward raw food. Gabriel Cousens was talking in that lecture I mentioned about what that does to protect you against all kinds of environmental hazards. And you can turn off the Wi-Fi, of course, dump the smart meter, get it exchanged. Most places you can do that. Change how you use the cell phone. Learn how to get the exercise you need, all three kinds of it, which everybody has to get in order to have your body function. It's built for movement and resting in a cycle. It's really kind of beautiful how it's designed. But if you don't move it, it stagnates and you have issues that come from that. And you learn how to get healthy sun exposure and get out in nature more and get the sleep you need, which makes a huge difference, and it makes things a lot easier to understand if you're not sleep deprived. And a lot of people are constantly, and they don't even realize that they're so used to it. So that's a choice. Learn about things or get victimized by the results. And I guess people might ask, what does any of this have to do with healing the massive problems of the world? And I would say a lot, maybe everything, is what you do in yourself, because you can really only spread in the world what you become. And fortunately, you have unlimited potential to become as much of your real self as you would want to. Otherwise, you say one thing and you spread another, because again, cell towers are not the only transmitters of frequency. Every one of us is more powerful potentially than a cell tower, but much more subtle. And if it's not focused and it's not developed and it's not waked up, then the admonition of the American founders that the system that they gave us, it only works for what they called an educated and aware population. That's the deal with the world now too. I don't think there's any political system or any other kind of system that's going to heal the world unless we change the state of our consciousness, basically. And I had an experience this week. I got to go fast again, and time's really going by, of exactly what I'm saying not to do. I had heard from a friend that I hadn't seen for 35 years, and the conversation somehow got into political issues, and we were coming from opposite points of view on all that, and it just destroyed any ability to communicate. And I realized later it was totally my fault. I knew a lot better, and it was unnecessary, a really harsh lesson, and my focus was all wrong, and I needed to experience the result so I'd see how important it was to fix that. And I'm sharing it with you because you might be able to relate to that. We can fight about being on different sides of issues indefinitely until we leave this place, and we won't have fixed anything. There's a deeper level that we can work on if we really want to help. And I'd say that our personal interactions, I'm trying to talk really fast because I got more points I want to bring up, but our personal interactions with anybody that you're dealing with in your life are like a microcosm of world affairs, war or peace, and we just need to watch ourselves more, self-monitor, self-assess, instead of critiquing other people constantly, which is what most people are thinking about. Probably the most important thing, I guess, in the list of poisons to take out in our lives is this condemnation of other people that we carry around all the time. And to do that, you can't keep carrying around the tension that you've got with you, that you've been so used to for years, that it's just like a normal baseline. It's not normal. It's like friction. It wears down the body. It makes it wear out and fall apart. And it's a good thing to drop. So you have to start becoming aware of, like right this minute, you can do it if you want to. Become aware of where you're carrying tension and let it go. Find it in your body, your neck or shoulder or any place, and just give it permission to relax. And if you do that with focus, it has to do it because you're in charge of your body. It's like a baseline relaxation that you carry around with you all the time, not just once in a while. Anyway, you can change other people that way. I've spent several days absorbing the lesson about that conversation that I totally ruined by letting it stay on just political arguing. It just gets nowhere. But life on the planet is in a critical turning point, and the rulers at levels above what we see have built a control system that's almost complete. That's why they think they're guaranteed success at this point, to succeed in our total enslavement and destruction. But their power is superficial, and it only looks impressive as long as we stay asleep. It has a built-in flaw because they're working against themselves, high on the drug of evil, and it kills whoever takes it. So they're the biggest victims, and they need help, but they won't listen to us about any of that. So what options are left? And again, I come back to the same point. Only one, and we can't fake it. You have to change your self-awareness, your consciousness. There's more than one level of getting back to the garden, and this is a deeper one. The physical beauty and the harmony of the organic garden is just a reflection of an energy. It's a frequency, and it runs through us too. But we've cut this. That's going to take too long to get into. We've cut this massive river of healing energy that flows through us all the time, keeps us alive down to this microscopic trickle because of the tension and all the conflict that we carry around in ourselves. And by our own mistakes, we're keeping our attention and focus on these conflicts all our lives instead of on the solutions and harmony. So a lot of people are discovering that unseen frequencies are real because of the example of the cell towers, right? And now they're having to admit, well, yeah, they do kill you, and they destroy honeybees and insect life, and they hurt trees and plants, which they do. 5G's a lot worse, but there are other frequencies that are also real. It's not only bad ones, and they're frequencies that are much more powerful than cell towers and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. The sun's radiation keeps the whole planet alive, even though medical people are telling you there's no safe level of sunlight. That should tell you how far away from what the reality that we've gotten. There's a master frequency that supports all the good ones and creates and maintains the whole physical world, and it flows through you personally, or you wouldn't be here. Potentially unlimited scale. So what's our job? Our role if we want to heal life on the planet? Learn to remove the barriers so that it flows through you much more. It comes into us and floods everything in the outside world. I know, we don't have time to really get into the explanation of this. Maybe we will for the next time, but that's the only thing that I see as the potential medicine that really would do something other than just talk or start a new belief or, that you could argue about with other people. This is something real. And I say that after a lot of time of working with it, still being a beginner, but it's real. And it's not the same as fighting about all these things about who's right. So if you find out about and remove the barriers that are inside of yourself and get back to the garden in your consciousness as well as in the physical lifestyle habits that you do. So it's not just a belief while you're murdering yourself physically. They go together. You do them on both levels at once. If you do that, find out the details of it. Watch what happens. It's quite amazing. And we got to go because we're out of time. So stay in touch with us at lostartsradio.com. If we get kicked off some platforms, you can find out where we are there. Also, brighteon.com/channel/lostartsradio. That's a non-censored one. PlanetaryHealingClub.com for people that want to take this further on a live interactive basis. That we're doing that in about half an hour from now, and then every week. It's really powerful. If you're interested in that, you're brave enough to do some work on yourself. PlanetaryHealingClub.com. Subscribestar.com if you feel like you'd like to help us stay on the air and expand our work and build the school we have in mind to build. Anyway, let me know what you think. I'm at richard@lostartsradio.com. I really appreciate you spending the time with us, and hope you have a great rest of the weekend or whatever day it is for you. And I look forward to seeing you again next time.